Um,
Got it.
you got
Yeah.
it? Yeah,
Yes, I got it.
cool.
That's
Well,
good.
so you go to bed at 4 in the morning at the moment?
What a way to start this conversation. But yes, I do. Uh, I, I don't know, man. I always had this really weird schedule, and I think with the pandemic, it just got worse. I don't know. Everyone's different, but for me, the most creative part of my day is from 7, 8 p.m. till around 3:30 a.m. That's when I'm the most creative. And I stop at that time because Katie, my fiancée, she goes to bed like she cannot go longer. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of my concession. But yeah, that's my thing. How about you? What's your thing?
It's the same for me actually.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same, but I haven't been able to follow that schedule for a long time now. So it's been really tough on me not to really feel like I have the quiet to actually do the creative work. Yeah,
That's the main thing, isn't it? Like when you are working on something creative, you need the space to get in this flow state that you need the quiet, the distractions on the day to day. Like, the phone rings, you get emails. Like, where I live next to a park, and even though like I have some, sound treatment studio, I still haven't completely soundproofed. So every now and then I hear like, dogs barking outside or stuff like that. And
yeah, yeah.
um, so you need that space where everything's quiet, where I can just lock myself in the studio and nothing's disturbing me. It's like myself working on it, and that's the only way. It's like entering like a time capsule, isn't it? When it happened to me yesterday, when I thought I was gonna do, I'm working on 3 different productions at the moment, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna do 1 hour of this, 1 hour of this, and 1 hour of this. And when I realized it was 3:30 a.m. and I've been working on one thing for 5 hours, but it's just the thing that you don't realize that. Only I have an alarm at 3:30 because that's my time to stop. And I was like, oh, I actually went this far and I didn't realize it. I don't know if it happens to you, but during the day, it's I find it more difficult. Apart from my brain, just the external environment, it makes it more difficult to
Yeah.
allow that.
For me, I would even go so far to say that I'm picking up the brain waves of other people. So it's not even the noise, let's say. It's just the
Uh,
fact that people are awake around me, which kind of like stops me from getting into how you call it, like the flow state. It really is true. And it's always been like that for me. And
no, that's super interesting. I'm just wondering how's that like practically? How's that work?
I don't know. It's just the fact that people are busy, say like are active around me, makes it hard for me to concentrate. So even so, like I have the problem that I feel guilty, like in the mornings and in the afternoons when I realize I can't do anything really. I feel guilty that I'm not like everybody else who just can concentrate. Um, for me, as you say, for me it starts like if I want to like I can get something done in the afternoon, like say after 4, that's kind of okay. But really it starts really at 7 or 8 in the evening. And as you say, it goes till like 3, 4 in the morning.
Mm.
That has been my preferred time of working ever since I was, I don't know, like maybe 18 or something.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So like a long time, like 30 years. But now having Uma, having the baby, things
Yes.
change drastically,
Mm.
right? But sometimes I just say, okay, no, it doesn't matter. Even if I only get 3 hours of sleep, I'm going to stay up and I'm going to do my thing.
Mm.
And I've been procrastinating, like composing this track for a library music project. It seemed to me like I was procrastinating, but I wasn't really, because as soon as I said, okay, I'm just going to do it, I'll do it in the night. It took me 2 hours and I was done. It's really like that for me.
That's that's very no. I mean, it's funny because I speak to a lot of people that are creative, and it's there's people like I don't know. Most people I know, they kind of are in the same boat. You were talking about procrastination that well, you didn't say that word, but I assume it was procrastination because I was projecting what I deal with. Like I tend to procrastinate, um, and it's very contradicting the way I my brain works, because when I have a lot of time on my hands and say, oh, I have all this time to work on this one thing, and I have a week off, I experience the same thing we're talking about, feeling guilty. And it's just like a thing, of course. It's just something great into our brains about like have to be productive all the time, and time is money. And And I find out I'm not as productive, even though I have all the time in the world. I'm not as productive in the creative world. And ironically, when I have a ton of things on, like I was mentioning, right now I'm working on like 3 deadlines that I need to finish, on top of a couple of other new projects I've been working on. And uh, if I compartmentalize the time, I'll say, like, I'm gonna work 2 hours on this, 2 hours on this, 2 hours on that. It's very exhausting. But I realize in the long run, I'm much more productive than if I just work in one project for 8 hours straight. I don't know if that happens to you. But so that's when I'm realizing. But I tend to, when I have a ton of things, I tend to, oh, I need to do this, I need to do this, and try to block it. And maybe once I realize, okay, I need to do this, and I prepare my project, that's kind of part of my ritual before I even start doing anything. I prepare my project on Logic, just getting the markers was super important, just to kind of start getting the idea of the song in my head. And the markers are super important because I start seeing the sections, and that's the way I work. I'm like, wow, this is actually cool. I want to work on this. But I spend maybe a week or two being, oh, I don't want to do this. And when I sit down, it's like, I always get back at myself for thinking, oh, why didn't I start this before? This is so easy. So it's just like this contradicting thing. But then,
Yeah, but I don't think it's contradictory at all, because I
right.
I experienced something quite similar, and like the way that I've learned to understand is that the
Mm,
process takes time, right? So like the genesis, or the creation takes time even before you put it in action, let's say, right?
absolutely.
So that's what happened to me, like with some projects where it felt like the project has been going for 10 years, but
Mm,
really it was only that last week of those 10 years where it happened. But everything before that was the preparation, right? Because like with some musical project, at least like in my world, right, it's very emotional thing. It's not just a craft to sit down. There's art, right? If you know what I mean. and
yeah.
and when that is involved, there's like a certain gestation period that I think we just need to accept as kind of like playing into the work.
What you're saying, I think the word you said now, accept, I think is a very important word, because on my end, I think I've been learning to accept my progress. And I become much better. I think this pandemic has been like incredibly good for me to improve in a lot of things. And it's been going for so long. Now I can look back to the stuff I started writing in March last year and what I'm doing now. And I'm like, oh, I'm actually getting better at things I hated doing. Like, programming drums is a thing that I do, but I hate doing. And now I'm getting very good at it. So when I write in demos, it's a thing that needs to be done. And I am like, oh, I can think like a drummer. I can do this. I'm not a drummer, but at least I can give something that um, that resembles a drummer. And funny enough, like some of these demos that I've been working on have been recorded by a real drummer after. And I told the drummer, look, dude, do you think this is just an idea for me to get the stuff going? And he ended up playing almost identically what I programmed, which was both amazing but also very with the word um almost horrific to have more responsibility of thinking, oh my god, I didn't think I had this, but it's good. And for me, it's been like this process of realizing, okay, this is my process. My process is not. I cannot have like a flow state longer than 6 7 hours. That's probably the max. When I do that without little breaks, the next day I'm completely destroyed. And I was comparing myself with other people who are very creative and I admire a lot. One person which I've, followed closely on his creative process is Devin Townsend, which, we work together on that for people who hasn't seen this. And I completely admire how down to a science he has his process, that he can write a couple tunes fully produced, fully demoed overnight. And to me, that's something that, wow, I really would love to be able to be on that point. But in my head is something that's not how my brain works. So I've learned, oh, I'm learning to accept the way my brain works and my process. And the word you said, to accept that, I need other things. So, for me, it's super crucial, and it has been crucial, this pandemic as well, exercise. So I, go to the gym or go biking like 3 times a week for like a couple, 3 hours. And it's a thing that I don't do it because I want to be like, a meathead, but it helps me on my creative process, because when I come back, I feel like my brain is clean, that I have all this energy and I'm ready to do it. And maybe I ended up spending only 2 hours or 3 hours in a project because I went to the gym that day. But those 2 hours or 3 hours were much more productive as if I sat down just trying obsessively being like, oh, you have to be productive. And that's not how I work. So I guess everyone's different, but hearing, I think that word you said, acceptance, and learning how to hack your own process, because it seems like he has a mind of its own. It's a great technique, I think.
It's really stupid, but I'm always almost 50, and I still feel guilty when I don't, when I feel like I'm not productive. But other people from the outside, they say, Marcus, you're so prolific, you're doing so much. And I said, well, actually, this year I didn't really do so much because it's true. But when I get to do something, usually there's a lot of music, or a lot of creative energy that gets out into the world. So for me, it really is just like these short bursts of time where I'm really productive, and the other time is just like feels like a waste to me still. But it's not. That's what I'm saying. I think like it's just about accepting that there is a part of the process that happens subconsciously that we're not aware of, and we need to give the subconscious the time to rearrange the parts, let's say.
Absolutely. And as you're saying, I think you like a sponge. Well, again, projecting myself, or the way I'm doing, um, that, whatever you do, whatever you read, the experiences you have, I've had ideas, and, I just come back to my head that I went with Katie, my fiance, a couple of months ago to this hike, this beautiful place in on the outskirts of Mexico City. It's called I forgot, Amatlan is the name of the town. And there's this hike that it takes you to these little waterfalls that are called the Quetzalcoatl waterfalls. Quetzalcoatl was a god from the Aztecs. He was the feather serpent, and uh, and it's supposed to be where on those waterfalls where the Quetzalcoatl was born. It's a beautiful place. I loved it. It was very tiring, and it was a very long walk. We need to hire a guide, which was like a kid, 14, 15 years old, that you give him like, 200 pesos and he will walk you through the whole thing. It was very demanding. It was beautiful. I love it. But as I was walking, well, we were hiking. Katie is like a big fan of birds, so she recognizes a lot of them. But she's been living here. She's from New York, and there's a lot of species that you don't find up there. And there was this bird that I just pulled my phone out and recorded it, and the name of the file was Dubstep Bird, because it sounded like a dubstep rave. It was like beep 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 boo boo beep 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 beep, whoa, something like that. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I want to use this and turn it into an actual rave. And it's just one of those things like, okay, you could say, all right, you're infringing the copyrights of the bird, but the bird is there for everyone, right? And I'm that's the thing that gave me, like, struck me at that point, that it was a pattern that it grabbed me. And I just stood there, and the guy was like, what is this guy doing? Just recording the dubstep bird for like a couple of minutes so I could keep that. And I bring him back to the studio, and therefore I turn it into a reef. And it has happened to me like that, especially when I'm hiking in open spaces, that all of a sudden I have like, oh, why don't I try this with my synthesizer? And I try like plugging my microphone into the gate, and Kay just looks at me like, okay, that's fine. I mean, she's used to it. But the creative process is happening in other places as well, even though you're not sitting in front of like a screen and a computer, which, I find really fascinating. And, hearing you back as well, talking about that, I think, this goes well with what you were saying of how it's everywhere, isn't it?
It is everywhere. Exactly. And for me, it is really very much also happening inside of me,
Mm.
like, so it's very rare to me that I hear something outside of me that inspires me. I mean, other people's music inspires me, yeah, of course, but most of the ideas that I have, they come from some sort of deep place inside where there's like a hidden, like sort of like a hidden emotion, let's say, that I don't really know what it is.
Mm.
And in order for me to kind of like understand it, I sort of I have to find a way to externalize, to bring it into some sort of sound or into like into a composition, right? And then once the composition is there, then it's almost as if I have then worked through that emotion somehow, which is really interesting. Like I think you this is the first time that I'm putting it this way, but that's really what it's like for me. So very little coming from the outside,
I
interestingly
do.
enough.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is true. And in my case, I can totally relate with that. And we're just talking about like how all these things even come from the inside and the outside, and everyone, as you were saying, every process is different. In my head, I can totally see where you come in with that, especially when I'm writing lyrics. Usually, when I write lyrics, I for me the most important thing is the melody, and I think lyrics, I mean vocals in general, but they're three-dimensional, right? Or four-dimensional, if you want to think about it, because you have an extra dimension that any other instrument. Any instrument you have, your harmony, your rhythm, and your melody, right? In vocals, you perhaps have a bit of harmony if you're using backing vocals. You have your rhythm and you have your melody, which are super important. And the melody on vocals, the thing that we, as humans are, programmed to tune to, the human voice. But then you have the added element of lyrics that combined with the intensity of the melody or the beauty of the melody, then you have lyrics that adds an extra layer of meaning to the music. So they're very deep. Just getting into that stuff is, I think, it's very interesting. That I think a lot of instrumentalists, when they start writing lyrics, because certainly what happened to me, I didn't completely understand the depth of a good melody with good lyrics is. It's so powerful. So normally I just, I'm writing lyrics. I normally think about first of the melodies. I'm writing some stuff, and I normally, being a keyboard player, I am very melodic, so I can hear the melody, and maybe I start singing what I call bullshit lyrics, which is just whatever comes to my head. But I normally hear like syllables that have a musical sort of ending or a rhyme. I'll write that down, but then I start writing those lyrics, and normally I tie them because I always want to focus on the actual lyrics at the end. Otherwise, I'm focusing too many things at the same time. But normally, when I'm start looking into those professional lyrics, it's when I'm start seeing what the song is about, because I don't know
Yeah,
until I
I,
start writing. It's just a stream of consciousness, this free association almost,
yeah, yeah.
that all the unconscious things, I'm not filtering. So the first thing that comes to my head, I'm just putting it down. And even though if it's words, sometimes words that make no sense and whatever, I'm just listening to the syllables and I don't care. No. But then I'm starting reading between the lines and what I'm writing about. I'm like, wow, this is tough. I mean, or this is cool, or this is giving me. So it's all of a sudden as if the song itself now is, or the music itself is communicating with me, even though it's just me putting my unconscious out there, seeing it, and then bringing it to the conscious mind, almost like a psychoanalysis session. So yeah, and when you start seeing the piece outside that came from within, and then you see what you're doing, then you're looking at it from the outside, and then you understand what's going on, almost as if the piece had life, but in reality you're understanding as well yourself whilst doing that. And it's a very interesting process, isn't it?
So, yeah, it's amazing. And I think that that process is also possible purely with music. So without the level of lyrics. But your example is great because it really illustrates
Mhm.
how that works. And really like a song, so like a melody, like you say, melody, harmony, rhythm with lyrics is sort of
Mhm.
the perfect marriage of two art forms that exist without each other. You have poetry, let's
Mhm.
say, you have music, right? So,
Right.
and if you think about it, like there's really no other marriage, let's say, of two different art forms that are that perfect. Like, yeah, you can paint while you sing, right? But or whatever. But you see, like I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
it's really it's like the like maybe, and that's why a song is sort of maybe the most human way that or the most human art form, right? Because because that language, it's still it's we're the only species that has a language that we kind of like know works
Mhm.
in the realm of meaning, right? And yeah, so
I mean,
you're writing songs. Wow, that's cool.
yeah, no, I've been writing for this brand new project. I'm on kind of like this is an interesting time as well to have this podcast because this we're getting too much into it, but like in Monday when after this podcast is I don't know when it's going to release, but today is Friday. What is the date?
19th of November.
19th of November. So yeah, I've been writing a ton of stuff for the last couple of years in between, and I mentioned to you as well, like I've been writing a solo album, which has been completely, utterly without the computer. I've been just jamming around with my synths, my drum machines, and make it an experience of you know the workflow and all the stuff. And I've been working for a new project, and as I was mentioning, it's an interesting time to have this conversation because on Monday I'm announcing that I am parting ways with Haken, and I've been working on a new project. That's for maybe for another question to talk about it, but this is one of the things that I started writing for this project when the pandemic started last year, and I got in touch with some friends, and I've been in the position of being the main creative force. It's a collaboration in the end, but I'm the one kind of putting stuff out, and it's been really fascinating writing from scratch again because it's something I haven't done in a long time, and it's been a very cathartic process because, as I said, you tend to I am learning things that I didn't know about myself, things that I'm putting out and was like, oh, this is cool. I like doing this. And it's kind of, sitting down with an empty page and thinking, wow, like uh what's now what I'm gonna do now. This is an empty page. Who am I? Musically, who am I? Because there's a big difference of being in a collective. There's a big difference like being in a group. You human behavior, you behave differently when you're in a group and then when you're alone, or at least you try to adapt, and that's kind of human nature. Uh, but when you are like, okay, this is me and this page, this is it. Who am I? And at first, I think it's kind of intimidating. Well, at least it was for me. It was kind of intimidating. But I was sitting down and like, all right, let's just forget about all these rules. Let's just forget about these ideas of these preconceptions of what others expect of me. Oh, and really realize what I want to do. And it's a question that I think when you ask yourself, you really ask yourself of what do I want to do? It takes a bit of digging, at least in my end. It took a bit of digging of realizing, okay, this is what I want. And the reason why I find it difficult to pinpoint exactly what I want is because there's no point of reference. I'm like, I love this kind of music. I love this kind of stuff. I'm into this kind of art. This is the stuff I kind of want. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have a vision and I can start writing for that. And that's just the most gratifying moment. And at this point, as I was saying, looking back now, I'll say like I'm 70% demoing the whole album. It's just like, or writing it. Now I'm looking back and thinking, oh, now it's alive, when you're looking back. But all starts with you sitting down with an empty page. And that's when I think that's the most, I would say, challenging, but also freeing experience once you decide to take it and not being intimidated by the empty page. I don't know if you have any experience on that stuff, but that's been my stuff over the last year and a half.
I mean, do it a lot. That's actually my thing. Also in my coaching activities, to get people to actually do something, because that's basically what you're describing here. Like, we can go from nothing to something, or I also say you can go from nothing to anything, and some people can't even go from nothing to anything. So that's why it's important to just kind of like do anything. Just put your hands on the keyboard, just put your pen to the paper, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of like it is the most empowering we can experience as human beings, I think. Like we have a choice, you know. Like we also have the responsibility somehow, like to get out of bed in the morning, but it's a choice, right? Like we could stay in bed, and we know that some people do, right? And it's not good, but you know what I mean. So that's why this creative process that you describe is it's a super deep, very
Oh,
human nature thing, as you say.
absolutely. And it's funny because um there's a lot of things like for me this like getting so deep into the creative process because I know the pandemic also like led us everyone to explore new things, right? um and let me just move this microphone. Okay. And one of the things that was very interesting for me when I started writing is that I started seeing things about myself that are problems within myself projected into the issues I was having musically. You were talking about do something, and and that's something I always been, always have neglect, always have been neglecting to do, or to realize that I am, I am normally creative. Like you were talking about the actual writing songs, but in my head, I've learned as well that when I am not in the mood for actually writing, I'm doing all the stuff that is also creative, but maybe in a different way. Like I do a ton of sound design, and you know about that, either for like commission based that people ask me to program sounds for synthesizers, or I do it for myself that I do it in advance. So normally when I'm listening to music, I'm like, oh, I like that sound, or I have ideas for sounds, and I do it in advance because every sound takes me about 2 3 hours, and some of them. But that's something I do in advance. So when I'm actually on the flow state, I'm like, oh, I need something like that, so I can literally go into my synths and press that patch I created, and it's there. I don't have to kind of interrupt the flow. So somehow I find a way now to have a system that when I'm actually not sitting and writing actually music, I'm doing other stuff that's kind of doing stuff in advance for something I might do or might not use, but it's there. But nonetheless, like I sit and I write stuff and I play stuff. And
You
one
know,
of the
like
things,
I think you described something really important here.
all
Like
right,
because what happens is that sometimes we're simply too judgmental about what we do.
that's what I was going. Yes.
Yeah. So maybe it is the sound design in that moment, which is exactly what you need to do, right? Like
Hmm.
it's not something that is less important
Hmm.
than the songwriting.
Exactly.
It's because if you kind of like submit to the idea to actually do what speaks to you in that moment, then that is exactly what you need to do. And there we shouldn't doubt that, but we do. I know.
And that's exactly what I was going at. And I think we, that's super funny that we're in the same wavelength here.
Yeah.
Um, that I normally sit down and I just play. Like, if I see the piano, I'm gonna start playing. I'm not kind of the cover guy, or I'm always just sit down and play. But I think because of the kind of music I've been playing and the kind of, in the industry where I've been, which is kind of the prog world, and there's this element of things have to be complicated and too clever. I realized I was everything that's coming naturally. I was always being like, yeah, but that's it's too simple. But the harmony is too simple. Oh yeah, but it's okay. And I'll just when I started noticing that, I started realizing how much I was, how much of the real me I was discarding. You know, this is what it comes out. It's a real me. It's like now talking to you. What I'm saying is not scripted. It's not that okay, give me 5 minutes and I want to write this script to make me sound even more clever or more stupid or whatever I want. But this is me, and this is what makes connections, right? That the real you is why you have friends and the friends you have, and the same for me. The real me is what you know build the relationships I have. But because in music you can write stuff, in my case, and the kind of music I play, where you have almost this immediate bug that, well, but it's in 4/4, but it's like all diatonic. Oh, but it's, and then I started realizing, well, but this is me, and I wanna start making this exercise of capturing these ideas. So I was mentioning about on that aspect, my solo record has been therapeutic in that end, which I'm doing something completely different to what I've ever done, but it's the real me. So making stuff that I don't care if it's simple or not. And the funny thing is, it might be simple on its core for me because I understand it. When something is complex for one, it means like you don't understand it. But when you do understand it, it's like if I say a weird word right now, I understand the word, so it might be complex for you, but it's not complex for me. But also, in the end, there's all the elements of, I always compare music with cooking, that it's on the details for you to be moved. And at the end, even though maybe in the core it's a simple tune and there's nothing wrong with it, and accepting that, what you're doing, it's still very uniquely you, because you're adding all these elements and all this decision making that make it entirely you, and it make it entirely different to anything else, rather than have this idea, oh, I need to be this, I need to do that, and then you end up being, basically the equivalent of being an Instagrammer of music, where you face tune your face to make you look in a different way, instead of doing, look, this is who I am, man. This is what I do. This is it. It's a very interesting process. I don't know if you can relate to this, but
And again, like I have been examining the same about myself, and my solution for that was to kind of like decide on an approach for any particular project. So sometimes I'm taking the intuitive approach, let's say, like, okay, whatever happens, whatever comes out is the thing. And funnily enough, those projects are usually the more successful ones. Interestingly enough, right? But then sometimes I just don't feel like doing the things I would do automatically, let's say, or intuitively, right? So and then I come up with some sort of concept that challenges me, and so that I create something different, right? Just to satisfy me, actually, right? But the funny thing is, and I say this as like a meta thing about what we're just talking about, the crazy thing is that nobody knows what's hard or what's simple anyway. Like, like if you're looking at like some shredders, like you shred, but it's actually super easy to do that, because like you don't hear the individual note, and like, right, but just playing a beautiful, like one beautiful note is much harder, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about. And so
absolutely.
like the uh, a big part of the audience, let's say, they really don't know anyway what's hard or what's not, or they don't care. They care about the emotions or the kind of story, that the narrative that they create themselves. And so that's why we, as the people who make the music, we shouldn't even concern ourselves with that. And so that's why I'm totally on your side. So just do what you do, and that's it. And that's the best thing that you can do, to be yourself in that case.
Absolutely, man. And I think what you're saying, I am talking about acceptance, right? I think this is like a topic on this or has been a recurring topic here. I think it goes with that. On my end, I think there's elements that you were saying about the shredding and all that stuff, and I've done it, but it's honestly, it's not my focal point. It's not a thing that I want to go, oh, look, I can play with the notes, and so I can impress my friends. I really don't like that. I listen to all sorts of music, and I appreciate all sorts of art, and generally speaking, I long for the one note that make you be like, oh my god, the lyrics that make you shiver, the music that just paints a picture, that the song, when it's energetic or it's like chill or it's melancholic, but that those things that you listen and it just stays with you, and you listen back, oh, this is so good, and it becomes part of you as well, because it becomes part of your life as well. You build moments around music, and I think that's the beauty about music, that as a creator, you creating the song and or the music, and the listener will create its own meaning of it, and I think that's beautiful. That they will create their own memories, they will create their own idea around it, and it is when it's no longer yours, it's everyone's. It's as yours as is the listeners. um but yeah, accepting that, in my end, that's where I can shred, if I want to, and sometimes it's fun, as you mentioned. Sometimes you want to, like, have a little lick, and yeah, why not? If the music calls for it, do it. But generally speaking, my modus operandi is literally just, in terms of sound, for me, it sounds, if I'm working as a sound designer or working as a keyboard player, is to paint a picture, and I'm very impressionistic about that. It's just create a sense of space and the textures of the space of like, oh, when I hear like this sounds, purple, or I want this spacious, kind of melancholic, and that's the kind of sounds I approach. So most of the times, and especially working with stuff like metal or stuff with a lot of guitars, keyboards is the thing that does that, and it's not very upfront, in your face, like, all right, guitar. But it, for me, that's what I get the most joy at, and sometimes it's nice to be in the front and be like, blatant, like, here this is me. But learning to also accept on my end that, to me, that is how I appreciate music, and as a sense of a texture, as putting the listener in a place and convey an emotion. And playing maybe sextuplets at 140 BPM, maybe it doesn't paint an emotion. Maybe it does if at that moment you want to have energy, but all the time, no. But in the music, as I was saying, the kind of genre I've been working on for 12, 13 years now, there's almost this expectation of doing that. This expectation of shredding and impressing and playing in 7/8 and then 15/16, and it takes time to be like, look, if it comes in 7/8, I want to do it in 7/8, right? If it comes in 15, I wrote a song recently, it was in 15/16, and I'm like, well, that's the way it came out. It's not like I'm trying to be clever, but it takes time to accept that. I don't know if you were talking about this, but as you were saying, as a creator, the main thing is convey emotions the best way possible. If that means shredding, do it. If that means playing the one note, play one note, whatever it is, right?
And you see, like, really we have no control over how things are being perceived anyway. Like,
Mhm.
and we have no I mean, we also have no idea what people hear
Right.
in what we play, what we do.
Mhm.
And for me, that has been really sometimes really beautiful. Beautiful, because it's that magic. It's that magic of communication without words, where the meaning is not important, right? The meaning is like there is some sort of medium. There is something in the air. Obviously,
Mhm.
there's sound, but it's not about meaning. It's not about conveying something in particular.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm not talking about film music here, where you have like a certain cliches that work, right? Like, this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like in the arts, right? And so I find that just so wonderful, because when I'm on stage playing solo performance, for example, I
Mhm.
can really completely tune out the audience, like in the most positive way. Like, I can acceptance again, accept them to be there in the space with me, and I can just play, not worrying about what they may think or feel, or if it's too long or too short or whatever, and just kind of like go for it. And it's wonderful. I'm really grateful for the that I'm playing with Tony Levin, right? Like,
Mhm.
because that gave me an audience. Like, and then to realize, okay, what I do works. It works. And you need to be a little bit brave sometimes to play slowly. You know what I mean? Like, but I really think it's just, we live in a wonderful time where there's space for this again. You can really you it is much more likely to have some sort of success if you do something that's really you,
Mhm.
than trying to be somebody else. And I think that's
Man,
great.
I absolutely second that, and that takes time because, as you were saying, it takes courage. I was going to say it takes balls because that's my favorite word, but it takes definitely
Cojones.
balls. Yeah, well, there you go. It takes balls to be you. It's it does. It really does because going about, we're talking about music and musicians and stuff, and you just open Instagram on YouTube and you'll find hundreds and thousands of guitar players like shredding and all that, you know and I get all these ads by all these cap simulators and all these people playing genty stuff and hardcore whatever. I don't really follow that kind of music, but it's interesting that you hear, oh, that sounds good, and you listen to the other guy and it's like, oh, that sounds, they all sound the same. And they're all ultra quantized. So the guitars are ultra quantized, the drums are ultra quantized, everything is just so squared and it's funny, like I've talked about this with people that a friend of mine who did a thesis on his master's in music, he's a drummer. He was telling me that, that in the 90s, people were complaining that pop was the most fake thing in the universe, right? So people were saying, oh, these guys use autotune, these guys are not real. Listen to Queen, listen to all these people from the past that were real musicians. And you're okay, that's a good argument. And at this point, it's the other way around, right? That a lot of this metal is just this. That I was, comparing these musicians as in the Instagram trend of trying to look better than you are, trying to sound better than you are. But along that process of you trying to be like everyone else, you start sounding like exactly everyone else. So you, by trying to fit so hard and not having, as you were saying, the courage of being like, look, this is what I do, man. This is me. Like, I'm not gonna fight it. This is who I am. You end up sounding just like everyone else and looking like everyone else and having the sound of everyone else. And therefore, you're like, okay, this is, and this is even not real. Like, it's a bunch of musicians. You listen, of course, me working with audio, you know when something is a real
Hello.
performance and when something is just like computerized and everything sounds like a machine. And again, the contradiction here that in the electronic world, people are trying to come up with ways, people play electronic music, EDM or, IDM, when trying to come up with ways to make the synths and the sequencers more human-like. But the people in the acoustic world playing with real human instruments and with human chaos and with human mistakes, they're trying to do everything they can to sound as a machine. It's like the wires go cross at some point, and one's going to one direction and the other one is going to another direction. It's very funny, and it comes to what we're saying, just to celebrate the uniqueness of when someone comes up with something that sounds different, man. It's cool. It's a risk, because what is you?
As an exploration of what is possible, I really like the use of technology. So that's
Mhm.
why, if you think back to the late 80s, early 90s, when like the breakbeat stuff started, and then real drummers learned to play that way. So it's cool. So in a way, I think that's also happening with guitar players and with keyboard players. And it's kind of a cool thing. And I think there is potential for a lot of musicality in that. So I'm not necessarily only seeing it as a negative
Mhm.
development, right? But anyway, like what is happen, or what is sometimes missing, is like the artistic integrity, right? And but on the topic of shredding, I like your shredding.
Thank you.
and
You
and
should.
all and also that I think that's why the tour we did with Devin was so enjoyable, because we didn't have a click, right? It was just real people playing real music together, and it's fascinating when listening back to the recording how
Yeah.
like tight it is in a sort of human way, right?
Mm.
And for me, when listening to it, I don't notice anything that is wrong, like it just.
It's two things, but going back to this, but firstly, just to clarify, I work in production as well, and I use technology, and as you said, there's things like you can use in your favor, right? I have tape machines, and I've been dreaming of making a production purely on tape, but the implications and the hiss, and I was like, all right, no, and studio time and all that stuff. So I'm totally with you, but I was talking about when the production is based on not on the actual playing. Like I've seen guitar players that play in that kind of genre that just record bar by bar and just like quantize the DIs, and then so there's no like a real, oh, that's how you sound. Yeah, of course you can tie it up your performance. There's nothing wrong with that. We all done it, and I think it's a good thing that you have a good performance. You know what? Just make it a little bit tighter, and that's it. But I was talking about this now bunch of like really ideas of, oh, I don't need to learn how to play this. I can just set this standard super high of something I cannot play by pretending I do and by using technology. So that's what I was saying. But and that's what I think is overusing it and not and missing the point that this is about music. It's about your sound and about your expression, right? That's what I'm saying. But there's a lot of another genre of music, which is electronic music, that is based on basically putting stuff into the sequencer. So both
Diego,
ways.
I think it's also about the motivation with which you are actually creating,
True.
and I've always been kind of like you know like some young people that start a band, they may
Mhm.
have they may want to belong to a certain group of people, for example, right?
Yeah.
Or you like a certain kind of like certainly when I was young, and there were people who liked a certain kind of woman, and they thought, okay, like this is a like a
Yeah.
goth rock style, and so they start making goth rock. It's interesting, like there may be some other motivations behind it, and I think the same is true for the Instagram stuff, for example, with the shredders,
Yeah.
because there's just something else that maybe me at my advanced age I don't even understand anymore. I mean,
You're still young,
but
artist. Go on.
yeah, but you're like 15 years younger or so, right? Like you're 33 or something, or
34, just turned 34 like a
34.
couple
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but
months.
there you
Thank you
go.
for young.
So, but what I'm saying is like the motivations are manifold, like, and that's why I'm um, trying to be as open, let's say, as possible.
I'm totally. I think I can talk about this from both sides. I grew up playing. I didn't have a ton of money when I was growing up, so I had one synthesizer that my mom gave to me when I was 14, and after that, she's like, okay, you're on your own, do your thing. So most of the stuff I had to, I was using. I learned about synthesis with software synthesizers, and that's how I learned. And I started using Fruit Loops back in 2003, maybe before that, 2002. Just like cheap software, and I had this horrible computer that I built with, I think, something ridiculous like 500 gigabytes hard drive and something like less than a gigabyte of RAM, and that's what I used, and it was crashing. But that's how I learned how to do that. And then when I went to college, and I went to college in London, and all of it was, that's when I started using Logic and using all these software synthesizers, and started getting heavily into production. I've always been really, really into electronic music. Bands like Infected Mushroom, they've always been like one of my favorite bands from all time. So just mentioning them for me is enough to say what kind of stuff I love. Um, and it's only recent that I started getting bored by composing in front of a screen, clicking a mouse. I I hated it. Like, it's just not enjoyable. And I spent a good chunk of my life doing that, since I'm talking about since I was like 14, 15 years old, but like much more heavily when I went to uni when I was 18. So let's just talk about at least 10 years doing that, but I would say 10, 15 years working on I mean, less than 15, but around that time, working with a computer and just clicking a mouse and just inputting stuff, and then listening, and trying to make something creative with 16 bars. But I had this idea that, a spontaneous idea, but then I had to program the drums, So the moment was kind of gone. Then when you play with a band, right? That when you like, let's try this, I just try, and it happens, and it's just all this interaction that happens in the moment. And I grew up, when I was a kid, I used to play guitar as well. So I had bands. We just, we'll get together every weekend, and just it will take us months to write a song, because it will be on the weekend. It would take us about 4 or 5 months to write a song. But it was a process that every week we come back, and maybe the first hour of the rehearsal will be relearning the tune because we forgot, and no one will practice, and then coming out with ideas. And eventually the song will finish. It was more like a collage rather than a song, but that's what it was. But that idea I started missing, and I felt the language barrier in this kind of interaction was something that I felt that I was leaving a big part of me behind, because I needed to be very analytical and using this part of my brain to input the stuff and learn the commands and all these things. And when I started realizing, I don't like that. Funnily enough, it's about 5 years ago, when my computer malfunctioned. It broke on a tour, and I didn't have a computer for like, I don't know, 2 3 months, because I was claiming insurance and all that kind of stuff. I realized, all right, I have all this stuff here. I have synthesizers, I have drum machines, I have a ton of stuff that I've been collecting. And the way this is working is like all of this stuff is going towards logic. So logic is on my computer is almost as if it's the center brain. And I'm just here manipulating and trying to, please the god of logic, because logic is telling me to do this, and logic is telling me you cannot do this, and logic is telling me the way things should be done. So I'm adapting myself into this. And then I realized, okay, I don't have a computer, so I might as well try to do something. So that's when I started kind of synchronizing my whole studio, my effects, and it took me a while. I had to, like diagrams on how to synchronize sending clock and sending MIDI clock and sending CV and sending MIDI and my master controller and my sequencers and how they're going to talk to each other. So it took me a while. I had to do like diagrams about that. But then I started kind of messing around with it, and I was like, oh my, this is so much fun, because then I will be jamming every day. I was jamming during that time and recording those jams, and they became like centerpieces for like a composition. But that was the initial stuff. So I had this audio interface that I can record what's going on in the master bus. So I was like, okay. But then when I was jamming, I was doing, oh, I wish I had this synth here. So I moved that synth there. And then the next day I was playing around, I feel like I need to connect this sequencer here. It feels more organic. So I did that. And so all of a sudden, I ended up in this space that it basically was an external representation of my brain, where I was in control of the whole thing. So eventually, when I got my laptop back, I was like, I love this, because even though I'm interacting with machines, those machines are set up in a way that feels intuitive and almost as if I'm having a conversation, even though it's all me. I don't want to have logic as my centerpiece, because this is the experience I've been longing for so many years, to feel this deep attention and stuff you're doing on the go, and this element of being in the moment, the flow state. So I found ways, getting too technical in to synchronize logic to be my slave, not to be the master, right? So at this point, the whole thing, even logic, became a thing that is part of this machinery, but is not the centerpiece that is telling me what to do. So that's what I'm talking about. This whole thing for me, this experience, the experience of the in the moment, the intuition, the same thing with synthesizer. I started craving for synthesizers that have a interface that I can create muscle memory, and I can jump and do it, because it becomes, once you get familiar with it, it becomes part of your expression. So that's been my story. That's been my kind of my journey in this aspect of detaching myself from that. And of course, I record, and then when I mix in the machine, and I love it because it's super powerful and it's much better than I could do with the rack units I have here. But I hope that paints a picture of where I'm coming from. That I don't want to come across as someone who hates technology. Quite the opposite. It is just saying that it can distance you a little bit from the process itself.
And it's and I remember that we talked about that a couple of years ago. There is a tradition of electronic music that started in the, like popular electronic music, let's say, that started in the late 60s. And like there was the German scene from Berlin, right? And that was the way they sort of had to do it. Like it was the hardware that they had to somehow kind of integrate into a setup that enabled you to create in the moment, to play, really, to really play with it. And that is, I think it's absolutely, it's not an old-fashioned concept at all.
No.
Like, you have your musical instruments, and even like you say, without that brain, you don't need a brain, like all these pieces are standalone
Hmm.
instruments.
Hmm.
So yes, you can bring them together in a brain, but all you need is a mixer. All you need is an analog mixer that takes the signals, and so you can hear them at the same time.
Yeah.
And well, you have the added benefit of MIDI control and stuff like that, of course. So you're creating some sort of like network of
Mhm.
devices, rather than this is the centerpiece that controls everything, right? And it's I think it is really, I wasn't so aware that it's but now that you mention it, I can see that there are probably a lot of people that have set it up in the way that you have left behind, with the centerpiece and the software being the headmaster of everything.
Yeah. And as I was saying, like the communications stuff, that the limitations that happen, we give so much power to when we're working with a DAW, even though it might be something trivial, and in theory all of them do the same thing, but they have limitations, right? And they of course have a huge advantage, but there's limitations as well in terms of brain flow, right? The way you can think about, oh, I want to do this, and being in control of it, it really puts you in a position of power where you can use the best of all worlds, instead of what you were saying, that the way I had it was everything communicates with my computer and then my computer out, but at no point the things communicate kind of just with me and the decisions I'm making. And if I want, I can do that. And now I got to the point where I'm having this hybrid setup that, if I'm working on a production, right now I'm working on a production that has like kind of electronic pop sort of vibe. I'm doing keyboards and sound design. Uh, I have the synchronized time coming out of Logic, so it's synchronized with my project. So maybe I will use a sequencer inside of one of my synthesizers, as you were saying, the standalone, and the hands-on aspect of like recording the performance, it just adds so much to it. Like too long ago I was working on a tune as well, and I got this little it might be something really stupid, but this little filter here that I bought on eBay actually came from Germany, so Deutschland filter. um and
Elisis.
yeah, it's a very old fashioned. I bought it super cheap. I was looking for a stereo filter. It sounds actually very good. And I've been using in productions on my audio interface, instead of recording an automation within Logic, and I actually perform the automation. So I have like the sound coming out of my interface into it and back into it, and I record that. And it might be something very trivial, but the fact that you first doing it, you put so much, you almost getting a performance of, it's a filter sweep for maybe 8 bars, and moving that, but you're like, oh, I didn't like that, I'll try again. And then you get in the flow of it and the sound of the filter and why you're moving and your hands movement, and you get into that stuff and you record that back. But also you commit to it. You record it, that's it. So you're happy with it. There's no like, oh, I'm gonna modify the automation. So for me, that I someone who maybe can overanalyze things, setting stuff into stone, it's also super helpful, because I don't have time to second guess. Maybe sometimes I remove stuff I added, maybe this is not needed or stuff like that. But so that makes me feel like when I'm recording one part, I record mostly audio, I don't record MIDI anymore, and being okay, this is good. That's it. I can move on. So the same thing with automation, and when I use outboard gear, just like sort of reverb I love from this unit from the 80s I have here on snares, and I just bounce it back, and that's it. So my setting of the reverb becomes, when I'm setting that before I record the reverb, almost like a ritual, when I'm paying all this attention to this small detail. And again, those decision making moves, all the stuff I'm doing, in the end adds to all the little spices I individually added, and it'll add up. Instead of, and the end of, oh, I'm gonna change the reverb, but maybe that reverb I chose made me choose a different sound for the kick reverb, for instance. No, but if I change that in the end, then like all this decision chain I made based on all those things, it falls apart. So for me, also being able to put it down, write it down, and forget about it also is very powerful. Instead of opening a project, loads of MIDI and loads of effects that you can change. I'd rather just commit to it. When I'm mixing, of course, I use automation, but you know what I mean.
But I'm proud of you because obviously that has been the bane of music production like this, that people have completely forgotten about the performative aspect of recording and mixing, and as you say, committing to a sound, also to have sort of like some like sort of articulation in your parts, right? Like what happens is nowadays, like everybody, like you're talking about guitarists again, like you record everything at the same level and then you automate to get like, but why don't you play quieter in this section, play louder in another, right? Something like that. And since I started producing for other people around 2008 or 2007,
Oh,
and
wow.
and from the very beginning, what I did was, because that was the time when DAW started getting a little bit more powerful, and people were just recording dead stuff. Everything was dead, like like in the production process. So I was forced to, and just like what you were describing, and I still do that, I'm reamping. And what I mean by that is not reamping like a guitar that goes through another amp, but I take a pedal, something that adds something or takes something away, and I re-record it through it. And as it's recording, I'm actually moving the knobs. So I'm adding a layer of meaning, of performance on top of what's already there, in order to get rid of the stiffness of the quantized stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that has been for me like really kind of like a successful approach, and it's an old approach. It's like at least I know of Brian Eno having like this in the 70s, like a board with funnels and all sorts of different tubes, and like he could put microphones and send signals through these filters, right? And I really love that approach, and that's why I have a pedal collection, because I love reamping snares, kick
Which I
drums.
love, by the way. Your pedal collection, your pedal board is one of my favorite things in the world. It sounds so good. So sorry to interrupt, but definitely it needs to be said.
Yeah, but like I think it's really, you're absolutely right. This aspect of it, the hands-onness, as you call it, right? It is so important, and like we should really try to get back to that somehow. And I think people are like, I think really people are coming back
I
to
honestly
that.
think, I mean, and if this podcast, someone listening and watching this, I honestly, that's a thing I was told when I was a student. And as I told you, I came from mostly a digital background. The first thing I had was in Core N1, which I still have. I don't want to get rid of it. No N for no one. That was the first one I had, and I don't want to get rid of it because it has so much emotional value for me. Even though, I mean, I still use it, but it's not essential in my setup. But I mostly come from a digital background. And when I was at uni, I mostly had, when I was first, I studied like contemporary music, and then moved to sound design and music production. And most of my tutors were DJs. And most of them were like, on their 50s, 40s, really good guys. And most of them would go on and on about that. They will go on about hardware gear is great. Like they would say, oh, the 1176 sounds amazing. And my head was like, what do you mean sounds amazing? It's just a compressor, it controls volume. Oh no, but side the LA2A sounds great on vocals. Or we're talking about, oh, the SSL EQ sounds so good. Those ones are a character. And I was like, oh, I don't care about this. And I never paid too much attention to it until I started experiencing firsthand how it sounds, and the aspect of the hands-on, as we were talking about, and how this is very important in the creative process, because we're talking about decision making. And back in the day, as you were saying, that's what would make a good producer. That's because the microphone choice and the amp choice and the room choice and the echo chambers, if they had any, all that stuff were little decisions along the way of how much gain you're going to put on the SSL. That's going to give you a flavor. So also the unit gives you a flavor, but how much little gain, and all these little things in the end piled up. And all this decision making is what used to make a good producer. And as we're talking about nowadays, you don't have that. But also putting attention into all these little things that maybe you don't see outside. talking about going back to this example of the filter sweep I was mentioning, I can assure you if I play that track to you, okay, it's a filter sweep. But for me, it has a lot of meaning as well. And that is also very important because it makes the process enjoyable. And it makes it 1,000 times more enjoyable than sitting here and just like, okay, so I'm going to draw a line, my computer, to me, I'm getting a better performance because everything in that tune, every sonic aspect was overseen by me. Every decision I made, the compressor I put when I was tracking the kick drum on my drum machine, and the settings I did, I might have spent some time doing that. But and I, do the old-fashioned way of taking pictures if I need to recreate that, taking pictures of what compressor settings I did. But in the end, like not only the musical elements, but the sound choice, the effects, the effect settings, the effect movement, as you were saying, the performance. Just maybe I will record the track and then do another, like, a real life performance of the controls on my synthesizers to add more movement or more life. So in the end, you end up with this thing that is a complete thing that is not recreable. You cannot recreate that if you were only using a computer. And we're talking about also being unique and all that stuff. And it's such a fun element. So I was saying, anyone that has not tried it, just try it, and you'll see it's so much fun. It's much more fun than sitting down in front of a computer drawing lines. It's almost like working with Excel spreadsheets almost now for me. That's how it feels. So anyway, fun.
Yeah,
I can see you
very much
smiling.
so.
It's like you know what I'm talking about. We're geeking
Yeah,
hard here.
of course. Yeah, my friend Benny, who I've been producing with for almost 13 years now, he bought this huge Digitech controller, which looks like a mixing desk, but it's actually just a controller.
Nice.
But it gives him like the same experience as if it was a real thing. And actually, like, ever since he has that thing, we actually write the volumes. It's not like drawing lines anymore on the computer, but we sit there, like each of us puts a few fingers on faders, and we listen through and we write the levels. And I mean, that's
Great. No, I mean, that's one of the things I told when I was in uni, is that back in the day, a mix was a performance. It was,
yeah.
I think Brian Eno said that I think it was Brian Eno, that he also would say that his instrument was the SSL. I think it was Brian Eno. If I'm misquoting, I'm sorry, Brian Eno. But his instrument he was playing is also the SSL, because a good mix also back in the day when you were printing into a 2-track, it was literally just, they would maybe practice the whole mix and trying to, get the automation in real life, or record the automation, later on when things were a little bit more sophisticated. But yeah, so I know exactly what you mean, and it's funny that a lot of a lot of musicians, we actually come to that conclusion eventually as well. Like we see the value in on those things, to make the experience enjoyable, and it translates somehow. Maybe the listener doesn't notice. Oh, I can hear that we're doing the right with the fingers, but it translates in the sense of the whole thing. It was more enjoyable, and everything, every step on the way, you pay attention to, and you put like your whole attention into it, and you put your physical movement, or moving the faders, or setting all that stuff. So it becomes a very, it's almost like cooking a good dish. Like all the spices were there, all the spices there, and the flavor in the end, it's different that when your grandma cooked than when you bought the same dish in the restaurant, because the grandma put attention to every element of, I miss my grandma cooking because she was the best. But like, grinding the pepper and doing the little chili peppers, and whereas in the restaurant, it's like, all right, I need to finish this, I have a ton of them, there you go. It's more like a generic sort of aspect. Anyway, that's my comparison. I was comparing music.
It is a good metaphor and analogy. I agree. I totally agree. And so let me ask you a little bit, because I don't think we talked about that much in the past. So let's just come to just say playing technique, right? So your technique, and like when I say technique, I'm not talking about playing fast or whatever. Like I'm talking about the whole totality of what makes you a great keyboard player. Okay, that's what I mean. So when you have like longish tours, right, and you need to deliver every night. How did you get there? I mean, in your, like, really your personal history, how did you train yourself to become who you are in terms of the physical aspect of playing?
Uh, yeah, I think that's a very good question. And there's, first of all, I would say I had the advantage of being a keyboard player, and I'm not a drummer because drummers, they need the stamina of a bull. They need to be like banging things and hard and for 2 hours. And drummers have a tough gig. In my end, as I was saying, exercise. I do a ton of exercise, especially, like every time I go on tour. We talked about this. Like you always get the pizza after show, and like it's so unhealthy. And as soon as I come back from tour, I will start exercising in nice and all those things. Also, I live in a city that it's something stupid like 3,000 meters above the sea level. So like when I come back, and I quit smoking as well a long time ago, but also when I come back from a tour, when I come back from being away as well, I spent when the pandemic started, I spent almost 5 months at my fiance's parents' house in New Jersey. So it's almost sea level. So I was biking every day, or almost every day, and when I came back here and I started going back to the gym, I was like, oh my God, I want to speed my lungs out. But definitely living above, I mean, such high altitude, and going hikes and stuff, it really gives me a lot of stamina. Uh, and those are the important elements, just to have doing a little. I mostly do cardio. But when it comes to the touring and stuff, I I love. I mean, I'm a very energetic person on stage, because I love music. It's just a thing I love so much, and especially music that moves me. When you play on stage and you have a good beat, and it's just a thing that happens, and it's part of. I guess it's part of my expression as well. As keyboard player, you're a little bit detached from your instrument. A guitar player is making the strings oscillate directly, right? That you have a very intimate relationship with your instrument, and leave alone a vocalist that is literally his instrument or she's instrument, right? As a keyboard player, you're somehow limited because you are pressing buttons. That's all you do, right? And in a typical sense of the word, think about a piano player, it's even worse because it's like your only expression is how hard you press a button. That's it. There's nothing else. As string players, they have this thing where they can just elongate a note and add intensity and vibrato and all those things that makes it beautiful. Piano players like bam, bam. That's it, and it's very horrible. So I guess also like physically for me, like when I'm on stage, it's like I try to make my instrument also my body a part of the expression of what I'm doing. People cannot see what I'm playing, but people can see that I'm enjoying it, and people can see that because I'm genuinely enjoying it. It's not that I'm doing it for. And so one of the things, like I'm very animated, and that can get tiring. I was in Australia a couple of years ago, and I was like headbanging as I do, and I hit my forehead with the edge of my keyboard, and I started bleeding on the stage. It was and I was like getting all dizzy. Oh, interesting story as well. Talking about dizzy, when we recorded that DVD with Devin Townsend in London. I don't know if you remember this, but we had a microphone to call, just to talk to the Sam, the monitor guy. Halfway through the show, I feel like I was fainting because of the lights. I'm not a fainty person, but I just feel, and I had to tell Sam, hey man, I feel like I'm fainting. Give me something with sugar. And he gave me a Coke. I never drink Coke, but he gave me a Coke, and that's what I did. So that was the thing where like, okay, you need to turn down a little bit because all these lights, I sweat a lot. But the thing is, what I try to be is focus mentally. I typically I will do some sort of meditation before going on stage. I'm not a new age person in that regard, but I really like to kind of bring my adrenaline back, being focused, like thinking about singularities, like focusing on my breath, focusing on what I'm doing before getting on stage, stretching my arms, being very relaxed. So it's almost like being in a good fight. I used to do martial arts in the past, but anyway, that when you're in a battle, your body needs to be on fire, but your mind needs to be very quiet. So you have to be ready to do what you're doing. You have to be active and sharp. But if you're stressed out, you stress a whole mechanism. So in my head, being relaxed mentally allows me to have a slow paced mind that is very vigilant of what I'm doing and what because I have a lot of things to think about and troubleshoot on the spot as well. I can tell you million stories where my rig has malfunctioned in the middle of a show and it's like, oh my God, I'm playing, but I need to think about it. So kind of being on that and also keeping my fingers as relaxed as possible. So I try not to play very hard. And that was a problem I used to do in the past. I used to really have that intensity I had, but also have that intensity on my forearms and my wrists. And eventually I started having problems with tendonitis. So I had to learn to keep the mechanism on my fingers very relaxed, economizing as much as I can in movement, in terms of not really playing too hard. That's what I was saying. I'm not a drummer. A drummer has to play hard. You cannot fake playing hard on the drums. With the keyboard players, you can. You just dial the sound differently. So keeping my fingers relaxed, so I can play a good show and I can focus on what I'm playing. And in those moments when I go crazy and I start, smashing the keyboard, then fine, But most of the time, I try to be relaxed so I can be in the music, and that comes along with a lot of preparation, a lot of practice. Whereas the music becomes second nature, almost like driving. So I can have a conversation whilst I'm driving. You know, that's the best metaphor I can because it becomes an automatic process. So now the conversation is with the public, or you making that connection and you or interacting with the other musicians or listening or like that tour we're talking about with Devin, which there was a lot of improvisation involved. That was beautiful because every night was different, right? And every night you had to kind of really connect with your surroundings, and that was really beautiful. But yeah, I think those things are key. I think it's a long answer, and I tend to talk about these things, but
No, it's good. Like there are 2 points that I found very interesting. So first of all, when you're talking about relaxation or relaxing your hands or fingers in this case,
Mm.
um, what I found for myself, and but also when I'm working with other people, is that the concept of what actually the relaxation feels like within your own body is something that is not so easily accessible. Like it's something that you kind of like sometimes have to even learn, because
Yeah.
somehow like your point of reference really of what is relaxed maybe is still very, very tense. Right. But like for me, maybe it feels like I'm relaxed, but actually like if somebody else comes and feels like says, oh wow, that's incredibly tense. But it's because it's relative. It's
Mm.
relative. So do you have a tip or an idea or anything you can say about that? Like how do you know that your mind, well, but maybe let's start with the fingers first, or then wrists, that they are relaxed. Is there any, when and how do you know that you're relaxed?
The about connection, like a mental connection with your whole mechanism. My actual warm-up exercise is a very simple one, and I have that my students do it. I don't do my warm-up exercise doing like bigger pages, and no, it's like literally sitting down and putting your fingers like that, and then moving one finger at a time, but making sure being very vigilant and know the part of your wrist, know your fingers is moving. And I found this is a mostly like a mental exercise where you're making building this connection with these tiny muscles of your fingers, and then focus on the rest of the stuff. So for me, making that connection, I think, is super important. And those exercises, like I remember I had like a young student once, and he was asking me like, oh yeah, so what do you do? And he was maybe on his mid-teens or late teens, and you could tell his thing was, I want to learn how to shred, dude. And so I just gave him this example, this exercise I do, and he looked at me and was like, really? Does that make you play the way you play? And I was, okay, man, all right, here you go, play this like a scale. And it was like, all right, that's great. But because in reality, it doesn't seem like much, but I think mentally it really makes me be connected with that. The more connected I with all the movements I'm making, I can then be vigilant when I'm playing, and it becomes a nature. I grew up with very bad technique. I was playing very tense all the time until I started developing tendonitis. And that's when a lot of things happened, but I had to go to physiotherapy. They gave me some exercise as well that to this day I'm still using when I'm tensing. But also learning as well the science behind tendonitis and how every movement is, that every movement is tension and release. And basically when you have tendonitis is when you have tension for a long, long time. Tendons are like little elastic bands that you normally, stretch them and you let them go. And that's key, that mentality, because what happens with I started getting tendonitis is when I was tense for such a long time. So when you let go, what happens is that band is kind of loose now. So having that in my mind, I actually had to kind of relearn how to play and relearn about my patterns and my physiognomy as well. Like as a keyboard player, I tend to be like that all the time because my hands are like this all the time. So when I'm walking, I need to remind myself about these things. Well, having that idea and keeping that in mind, then I started noticing okay, so this movement of just moving one finger at a time is like, okay, focusing on the tension and release of only this finger or maybe the next finger, and starting getting used to that sense. So when I'm playing, I always try to keep in mind that movement. So when I'm practicing, I do a lot of playing very slow and exaggerating the tension release. For instance, if I was playing octaves, without getting too technical here, but I used to do octave tense all the time. And the actual good exercise is playing the octave and then release the tension and then practice that very slowly until that becomes a nature, a second nature. So it's all these little things that when you're on stage, you kind of monitor yourself and, oh, I'm fine. And sometimes I tense. I still do it, especially when emotions happen. But most of the times I can do that and try to practice that playing as soft as possible as well. So when I'm playing on stage, I can last 3 hours. That's what we were doing. I was on stage for 3 hours, and I was fine. And just practicing those things to keep relaxed. I used to practice for a long time with a sign in front of when I was in my piano that said "relax your shoulders," and that was a problem I had all the time. I mean, that was all the time is relax your shoulders, and it's finally come to the point where I know. So short answer is making the connections and knowing that idea of tense and release, like every movement in order to be healthy, you have to do both things, the tension and release.
Beautiful answer. Beautiful answer.
Okay.
Could have been me saying that exact same thing.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
On the touch instrument, I call it touch release.
Okay. Yeah.
And actually I have a third movement in it, which is actually called move. So it's touch release move. So it means like energy in, energy out, and do whatever and go to the next. And that's touch release move, touch release. So you actually let completely go of the tension even after you release, because what happens to a lot of people is that they release, but they have they keep tension, like, but then you need to allow yourself even that third step. That means, okay, so now I just go and play the next note, and as I go and play the next note, that's when the tension comes back in, and I touch the note, and there is the tension for the duration of the note, or let's say even only for the attack of the note. And after that, it's all relax, release, move around, so
Beautiful.
yeah.
And then it comes to I use borrowed this phrase from this book that's called "Mixing with Your Mind," but I think this is Australian author. I don't remember the name. It's just basically the psychology of mixing and not really about like frequencies. It's more about stuff. But it's a phrase he repeats a lot throughout the whole book, and he says that the aim is to create a maximum illusion with minimum voltage, which makes all the sense. When you're mixing, you're trying to make something sound huge without overcrowding the mix, all those kind of things. But in this sense, that's kind of a mentality I try to use as well. So have the maximum illusion with a minimum movement, economize as much as I can on my strength and my movement. So if I only need to move one finger, I'll move that one finger and try to only move that one finger, because the moment I move something else, I'm wasting energy that I could use for a 3-hour set. So yeah, that exercise you're talking about, like also it kind of goes what I was saying about the octaves, which is like tense release, and then you move to kind of make sure you're completely off the tracks. But it's great. It's funny that we come to similar sort of conclusions doing different things. That's very very cool to hear.
Yeah. No, I think what we're talking about are principles. They apply to anything.
True,
I really think they do.
true.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And so can you talk about this new project? I mean, is so you have the solo project you said, and you've been writing for a new project. Is that a new band project or okay?
It's a new band at the moment. I still will not disclose much, but mostly that is basically almost done writing it. We're about to book studio, and it's 5 piece, and just with people that are friends of mine. Some of them I've worked with them before. Some of them I never worked with them before, but they're all like friends of mine in history. And I'm very excited. It's sounding very good. It's been all this time on the pandemic, just sending stuff, and literally yesterday I had a call with a couple of them looking into booking studio for actually now doing the actual production. So it's very exciting, and that's the first time I talk about it publicly. So about this,
It's a
it's fun.
premiere. Hey, and do you know where you're gonna record? You know which studio or?
Yes, I know, but I don't want to disclose this.
No,
I'm just
no,
gonna
you
say
don't. You don't have to say it. I'm just curious. Yeah.
it's
Okay. Cool.
definitely across the pond. That's what's happening. So it's on this part of the world. So yeah, it's exciting.
Mhm. So you're in Mexico right now, right? Mexico
Yes,
City.
correct. Correct.
And like you you reminded me of the um, uh, the altitude there, because it was so funny. Like a couple I was there, maybe I don't even remember, 4 or 5 times.
Hmm.
And like like sometimes I'm wondering, like, why do I feel so strange? And then I realized, oh yeah, the altitude, right? But there were like whole stays where I was there like for 3 4 days, and I didn't even think about it. Like, and I didn't notice it. um and how are things in Mexico at the moment, like with the pandemic and stuff? Like, is it
Um,
have people been responding um, in a good
yeah.
way, let's say, or
No, yeah. I mean, it's very funny because when the pandemic started, I was in the middle of a tour in the US. And as I mentioned, I think no one ever imagined it was going to go for this long, right? It went told, oh, a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. I'll be back in the summer. So I ended up like, when it got aborted, I went to Katie's parents' house in New Jersey. And because I was waiting for my equipment to come back, and Katie was there, so and then, Katie's parents were very happy to have me over. So it was nice, and they live in beautiful places, in the forest, in the woods. There's like literally bears and deer you see walking around. So it's very cool, compared to me being a city rat all my life. I live in London, I live in Mexico City, which is, I'm a city rat. It was very nice to see. And when things started getting serious and more serious with the pandemic, when people started realizing, oh, this is a real thing, because at the beginning people were dubious, which is, oh, this is silly. That was March, only a few months after it kind of broke down on China. So it was still people very, very, very skeptical, and myself included, to be honest. We never seen anything like that. So okay, whatever. And things started getting bad in the US, not where we live, well, Katie's parents live, but around. And then okay, I don't feel very comfortable going back to Mexico, because I fear that things are going to be worse than anywhere else there. Uh, and eventually, I came back over a year ago, and I think August. And when I came back, there was like, I think last year there was a big, big, big wave, and I heard of a ton of people or relatives of people I know that were passing away. So I think there were the parties, and Mexicans are all about the parties, man. And if one thing we know how to do right is have a good party. But you had Dia de Muertos, you had Independence Day, you have Christmas. So uh, being a deeply religious country, mostly Catholic, it also, people celebrate a lot of stuff. And December, like, I remember I spent Christmas in New Jersey last year, and remember hearing on one weekend after Christmas the brother of a friend of mine died, and a bass player I knew before died of COVID, and it was like, wow, it's people my age, and it was really terrifying. So it was really dark, and I think once that started happening, unfortunately, once people kind of thought, like, okay, this is real. So to this day, most people, you go outside, and most people are wearing masks, and more people are just being careful. Bars are open, and and the things like that. But funny enough, I travel a lot to visit my fiance's family in the U.S., and I've been to Wisconsin, and I've been to New Jersey, and other paths, and it's like the pandemic never existed. So you go to these places, and you get an Uber and says like, okay, you're required to wear a mask, and you get in the Uber, and the Uber driver's like, I don't care, don't wear it. It's like, all right, it's really weird, and even in the airports and stuff, like is you see it immediately that is a different mentality. And I guess I don't know. It's for me, it was surprising at this point. It's surprising that people were like, okay, this is real. Let's just do it. Compared to other parts of the world, when people are like, all right, let's just put that behind us. But I don't know what's going on in Germany. I've heard right now they just announced a new lockdown. Dante, I've been following that over the last week, so it's crazy.
The numbers are up for sure, and like the interesting thing is like I have sort of like just decided for myself to kind of lock myself down, or like it wasn't really because like the way that I think, like, I don't know how to say it, but there's like some sort of responsibility that we have, right? So it's not about the state telling us to go on a lockdown, really. Ideally, if we were all like self-actualized human beings, everyone would just kind of like do the right thing, more or less, right? We know that that doesn't work out, and so there needs to be, uh, you know, some sort of executive telling you to kind of stay at home or whatever. And I remember like talking to a friend at the very beginning of the pandemic, and he said to me, like, if everybody on the whole planet would stay at home for 2 weeks, this thing would be gone. And he was kind of right, but it didn't get to that.
I know, and it's crazy because I totally agree with you, and the whole thing I think got out of hand. I'm not in a position to talk about politics because I'm not a politician, but I do think that the fact that a matter of health became a politic affair, I think that was when things went wrong. Because there's nothing, like since when cancer became a thing about politicians to discuss, of whether left or right, it's something you need to deal with. I'm not comparing this with it. I'm just saying like health is one thing that I don't think it needs to be put on a politician's agenda, but that's what happened. And I have a couple. They're really good friends of mine who live in Australia. They're Mexicans, and they've been living in Australia for, I don't know, 6 7 years now. And the lockdowns there were savage. They were really strict. And I was talking to them, and they were like, "Yeah, we're not allowed to walk uh, beyond, I think, 1 mile perimeter to where they live." I don't remember the distance, so please don't hate me, people, if I got it wrong. But they had this restriction, um, and uh, and they were super tough. But what happened is he would tell me, well, we're still in lockdown again and again and again, because there was always one rebel that didn't want to listen to the authorities, and so there were lockdowns over lockdowns and over lockdowns and over lockdowns. And initially you were thinking, okay, Australia is doing the right thing. They've been super, harsh with it. Uh, but the results were not as different than maybe the rest of the world. And it really makes you think. I'm pretty sure in a few years' time, there must be some sort of behavioral psychology sort of study of this phenomena, because every country had a different strategy. Well, to say Mexico had a strategy is a stretch, but every country had sort of a thing they had to do, um, and they all have a different mindset, and they have a different thing to do, whether it was a politic agenda or not. Uh, but the results were not that different in the end, and I think that's remarkable. I don't know the info. I'm pretty sure, and I'm looking forward that, in a few years' time, of seeing all the studies, like the behavior, human behavior studies of what happened here, because I think it's very interesting. At least I think it's very interesting. I don't know what you feel about that.
Okay. Sure, it's interesting. Yeah. And I really think there's really like no answer also. Like in a way, we just every one of us needs to try to stay sane,
Hmm.
and that's sane and safe. Yeah. And but it's always like a little bit of a trade-off. You need to kind of like see, okay, what works, what doesn't work, and I acceptance, right? Like it's about acceptance again, and also about acceptance and respect for other people.
True.
And I think like we can all learn quite a bit in this phase. But let's see. I just like for you it was different. I was in Tokyo when the lockdown in
Oh,
Japan
wow.
started. I was
Wow.
supposed to be on a tour. Originally it was going to be China, Japan, and Hong
Wow.
Kong, and and so we were in Japan, and it was the Thursday morning when we got together in the lobby in the hotel, and we got the phone call. They said, okay, like on Saturday, there's going to be a lockdown in Japan. So we only played one show on the Friday night. and and so I knew immediately that this was going to last a long, long time, because like the way that people in Tokyo were reacting, like the streets were empty,
Wow. Wow.
and it was we had 400 tickets sold for the show, and only 60 people showed up for the show, something like that. So I knew something is going on, and then I stayed for like another 4 days in the city till my flight went back. Uh, so it was like the Wednesday or something, and I drove to Narita Airport on like in a bus, and the motorway was empty, and I got to the airport. And on my way from the check-in to the gate, I maybe saw 15 people at Narita Airport. So I knew
Wow.
it's really real. It is happening. It's real. And then I remember I had a layover in Helsinki, and in Helsinki everything was normal. So in that moment I knew, okay, so this thing is going to come all over here, all over the place. It's going to be all over the world in a couple of weeks. And that's what happened, right? And then it took a long time for people to realize what to do. And but I knew this is gonna take a couple of years, like, or more. That's what I was thinking from the very beginning.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh man, I wish I had your analytical powers. I mean, of course, your experience was hugely different. You were in the epicenter of where things were starting, and you saw, okay, this is serious. And I remember on that tour, I was on tour with Devin Townsend, Hiking Was Poor, and I remember Devin was very worried about it. And we're talking about that was in February 2021. No, 2020. Sorry, no, not this year, the year before. Uh, and we were on the production rehearsal before the tour, and I remember he was telling me, "Look, I am very worried about this, man, this thing." And I at that point I heard about it, somewhere in the news, and so like it was something happening in China, but I was in the middle of moving houses, and I was in the middle of like, okay, wow, we heard about that, and at that point, to me, his reaction sounded a little bit like overreacting. And I was like, well, hopefully it's going to be okay. And, hopefully it's going to be contained. And also out of experience, I don't think any of us have gone through anything like that ever. So that's why it's difficult to imagine the depth and the depth of the effect this was going to have. Um, and I was like, okay, and then all of a sudden, like things started getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the point that, okay, tour is canceled. And that's when I started realizing, oh, all right, it seems to be excessive, but okay, like this is like the authorities said that it was not a lockdown, but they were advising to, I think they were doing that, advising that to happen. I think that's when the UK there were closing flights from America to the UK, and some of the peeps there, some of the staff was from the UK and whatnot, and Morgan from Sweden and all that stuff. So it's like, okay, that makes sense. We don't want people trying to hear without getting a flight. I think it's, and I thought it was the best decision, of course. But at that point, I was thinking, well, what's going on? Is this really a thing? And it's funny that for me it took me a while to oh, it is actually a thing. When you start hearing about it and seeing it, it's like, oh, it is a thing, and it's gonna go for a long time. But to me, I mean, the first months I was like, okay, I'm just here for a bit. I'll go back home and finishing the move. I'll be out for the festivals in the summer, blah blah blah. And all of a sudden, like, no, you're staying home. And you're staying, and you're staying. You then girlfriend, now with my fiance, parents home. Uh, so definitely for me, it was a different process, and I think if I knew like you did, I would probably have panicked more. I think rather than just coming, you're chewing a big bite, and you're like, okay, oh, I see. Rather than boom, like it's gonna be 2 years, I will probably have a little panic attack or something. But of course, you're you, and you're like, yeah, whatever. you know, you can say whatever, Marcus. I know.
You know, for me, it was really, yeah, I think maybe it was an advantage that I can just say, okay, I know I'm not going to go on tour, so I need to find a way to make a living. And so I mobilized all my powers, right, to kind of like set new things in motion. And I'm really grateful I was able to do that. It was difficult to sustain that, I have to say, and now it's really, and I actually played a couple shows like on a Saturday and on a Sunday just a few weeks ago in Czech Republic.
Yeah, you told me. Yeah.
And that was really wonderful, I have to say. Like, I didn't really expect it to feel so great to be back, you know playing. But it really is not so much about myself. Even it was about the celebration, let's say, of celebrating music in a way. and and I have to say, yeah, I have been missing it a lot.
Yeah.
And so yeah. Hey, my friend, so this was amazing. This was already again another long one here.
I mean, we haven't talked to each other for a long time, and
Yeah.
that was, for whoever's watching this and listening to this, it was, that was a day-to-day thing on that tour. I remember just talking to you about a million things, and everyone else involved as well, but like just a constant conversation like this. And of course, we had silly conversations, talk about stupid things, but it's uh it's just a thing as well. We haven't talked for a long time, so just talking is like, all right, let's just, what's the next topic? I mean, we can just carry on talking for hours and hours and hours and hours, which I think is a beautiful thing. Is Thank you for inviting me to this. It's fun.
Of course, of course. And I wish you all the best with your leaving Haken and getting the new project off the ground, and like your solo stuff. And I hope that we're going to meet again at some point. Yeah, and I know we will. I know we will.
Well, what my real hope is to share a stage or some project again as well, because we were communicating very well as well on stage, not only off stage and talking about deep things, but also we were working together in a lot of things, and I felt it was a very good, seamless kind of team that we were just like bouncing off each other. So that's definitely something I would love to do again, whether in X or Y or Z project, whatever it comes. But
Yes.
for sure, I'm looking forward to
Yes.
that.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marcus.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye.